Hi everyone, and welcome to part 2 of my deck collection series that I'm doing kind of leading up to Samhain. For part 2, I thought I would do, I was tempted at first to just go right to like my starter decks and like my RWS and RWS clone decks, but I wanted to, after the fairy tale decks, do the dreamy decks next. So these are decks that have a kind of dreamlike or surreal quality to them. And some of these are perhaps, I don't know, kind of unusual choices, and this was a category that I kind of had difficulty with now and then. There are some decks in this collection that I think you could easily file under other categories in this series, but this seemed to be the primary energy of these decks is a kind of like dreamlike, surreal, not exactly fairy tale. Again, there's a fantasy feel to these decks, but it feels more kind of dreamlike and liminal and strange than just like a fairy tale energy. So I'm going to go ahead and dive right in. I have a few decks here to get through. All right, so the first deck I'm going to start us off with is a recent acquisition into the collection. I've wanted this one for a minute and finally picked it up, which is the Crow Tarot by MJ Cullinane. And again, I really love corvids. Very much. I love crows. I love ravens. So I really wanted this deck. I know that it is an RWS clone, so it kind of took me a minute to, try to justify picking it up, but I am so glad that I did. Comes in again, this very, I don't know why I said again as though it's the first deck, in this very kind of sturdy box. Nice two-piece box, which I infinitely prefer for mass market decks over the tuck box. I ranted a little bit in the last video about tuck boxes and how flimsy they are. So it does have a nice box. It has a lovely book that goes through and gives very, very standard meanings. This one is published by US Games. And again, like I said, I wanted this one for a while. It took me a bit to kind of justify getting it just because I have a lot of other RWS clones, and I do have also things like the Raven's Prophecy, which is actually not in this video. So I do have other decks that are kind of, they give me that sort of, I don't know, autumn, corvid energy that I like with this kind of deck, but I really wanted this one, so I did go ahead and pick it up for my birthday. So these are our backs, these very sweet this feather motif, which at first they almost look like autumn leaves, but when you look closely they're actually corvid feathers. All right, I think this one is in order if I'm not mistaken. So again, I really kind of like this one. It has that sort of digital collage art style that I don't always love in a deck, but for some reason really works here for me. There's something just so kind of strange and symbolic about this artwork that I quite liked, and it's very vibrant and colorful. I feel like it just, as a photo collage, it doesn't feel, the elements don't feel so disparate and jarring. They all kind of gel for me anyway. And as again you can see, looking at it, it is a pretty standard, I would say, RWS clone. Again, not a perfect clone, but very much a traditional RWS deck. I really like this Hermit card. And I love it to bits. I think it's great. I like the cardstock. I don't mind the borders on this one. And I know that there are some other Raven decks coming out this year. What's that big fancy one that's coming out that has like the special edition? It's a much darker deck. I like that this one isn't, it's not super dark, it's not super morbid. Again, I say as I flip to the devil, I do have a lot of horror decks and dark decks and shadow decks. Like I really like dark shadow decks and horror decks. But I like the fact that this is a corvid deck that isn't necessarily like very dark and Halloween-y and ooky spooky. It's more autumn than it is Halloween or Samhain for me. So I quite like this deck. All right, this next deck is also a photo collage deck. This is a vintage copy of the Enchanted Tarot. Whoa, this box is so big I can't get it on camera. By Amy Zerner and Monty Farber. I picked this copy up actually on eBay just because it's a vintage edition from the early 90s. I really didn't like the borders on any of the most recent editions of this deck. Again, it is an older deck. It's one that has been reprinted a number of times, and this edition is the only edition that I really aesthetically enjoy. The most recent, the 25th anniversary edition that was recently published, I think it's now out of print possibly, so I'm hoping maybe we'll get another reprint of this deck at some point with, I don't know, smaller borders and smaller cards. The most recent 25th anniversary, like the cards were like this big and had very, very large borders, and I don't know, they just weren't for me. I just aesthetically, I didn't really enjoy them, so I wanted to pick up a vintage copy and was lucky enough that I did find one on eBay for a pretty decent price, especially considering that it did come with the box and the book. Again, this box is a little banged up, as you can see, but see, it's torn here, but not really in terrible, terrible shape. And again, I don't really mind, just because I don't keep the deck in this box. It's one of those very, very large shelf-eating boxes where you put the deck into this much larger box that's meant to house the book, plus the deck. Here's our book, which is very wonderful. It's this very large paperback. So you can see that is in full color, which I think one of the most appealing things about this is these full page, full color illustrations of the cards, which I just think, I mean, this is such a stunning deck. I'll show you in just a second. I find this deck, I was so in love with it and so frustrated that I really hated the size of the cards and the borders on all of the contemporary editions of it. So I was so happy to be able to pick this one up. And again, I don't keep it in its box. I keep it just like with my other decks in this little bag. So the size of the box and the damage to the box is not really a problem. Again, for the price point I managed to pick this up for, I'm surprised it has a box at all. So, oh, here are our backs, which I really love these backs so much. With our wands, our swords, our stars, our cups. Look how pretty. And then here we go. So again, like I said, this one it's also a collage style deck. Again, it is a vintage deck. It's one that has had a lot of popularity over the years. You do see it often on TarotTube, which is where I first saw it and completely fell in love with it. And again, I could not hold my nose and get that 25th anniversary edition with those borders. I'll put a picture up too in the side so that you can see what I'm talking about. I just did not like them at all. I really preferred, again, the borders on these, which don't bother me, that feel just much more, I don't know, just simple, classic. I like the typeface. Like, I just love these aesthetically so much more. And I just feel like the art it's colorful, it pops, it's showcased just enough. I understand why the newer edition of the deck has such large cards, because it's really trying to show off the intricate detail work of the art pieces that were created for this deck. But I don't, it had bad cardstock, ugly borders, and it was so big. It was so big. I ranted in the last video about how I have really tiny hands, and shuffling large decks is actually kind of uncomfortable for me sometimes. So I quite prefer, again, the standard tarot size of this deck. Oh God, it's so beautiful. But so if you're looking for a vintage copy of this, I highly recommend, again, just keeping your eyes on eBay, and also some tarot BST, buying, selling, trading groups on Facebook, which is actually where I initially saw the listing for. This was on a BST, and then I did the transaction with the seller over eBay. Through PayPal, and it was for such a great price. I had to jump on it. I was so excited. So occasionally you do find this deck. This is one of the only cards I don't really like. I'm not sure why. There's something about like the mask that feels a little too, like, I don't know, digitally transposed onto the quilt work. There's just something about it I don't like. This one's one of my favorite cards. This is Tower. Looks like St. Paul's Cathedral. Anyway, so you can, if you keep your eyes peeled, still find vintage copies of this deck floating around. And again, I would imagine, since it seems like the 25th anniversary edition possibly just went out of print, I know that it's out of stock on Amazon and a lot of other vendors, so I'm hoping that maybe some of the criticisms that were leveled against it with, the sizes of the cards, the quality of the cardstock, the glossiness, the borders, that they may reissue the deck again and take some of those criticisms to heart, because it's such a stunning deck. Like, really, the artwork is just, it's sumptuous. And again, I put this one under a dreamy deck because, again, it has a sort of sweet, strange, liminal, highly symbolic energy that it doesn't really feel fairy tale to me. It feels more like a dreamscape, where you're just trying to make sense of all these disparate symbols coming together like a patchwork, which is what's so appropriate. Like this, I love the that each of these cards is like a quilt. It's so pretty. So anyway, I'm just like looking at the art now. All right, so that is the Enchanted Tarot by Monty Farber and Amy Serber. If you keep your eyes peeled, you usually can still find vintage copies for a relatively decent price. I say decent price being between, you know, $50 if you're very lucky, up to about $150. I do see copies of this sometimes going for $200, $250, $300, which I'm just like, no. But you can still sometimes find it for less than $100, and I think it's totally worth it. It's a great classic deck. It's such beautiful artwork, and I prefer it infinitely to any of the mass market versions that are out currently, or I guess not currently anymore. So this next deck is actually one of my favorite decks. It's, I think, probably, if not my soul deck, then certainly a front runner for it. This is the Linestrider by Ciolo Thomas, which comes in this big, beautiful, glossy, magnetic, hinged box, which is a bit of a shelf hog, but it is such a wonderful box. It does have the ribbon closure and the illustrated frontispiece. And it does come with, once again, these huge shelf hog boxes are justified because they include these wonderfully large guidebooks. This one is so weighty. She's heavy for a paperback. That has these wonderful keywords, detailed explanations from Ciolo Thomas, full color prints, which I quite like. You could easily gently remove these with a box cutter if you don't use tarot books, and use them as actual art prints if you would like. And I don't know what it is about this deck. I think that it's the kind of watercolor energy about it that I really respond to. Again, I grew up by a beach, so I quite like water decks a lot, even though I'm an earth sign. And there's just something dreamy and lovely about this deck that I don't know what it is. I really, really respond to. The minute I had it in my hands, I was so happy. So here are our backs, which look like these sort of watercolor Rorschach tests. Quite interesting. It's funny, they always kind of remind me of Hannibal, like the opening credits for Hannibal, but it's blue instead of red. As of course the opening credits of Hannibal are, but I love every time I see like watercolory Rorschach test, all I can think about is Hannibal now. So all right, let me go ahead and scooch this box over. So to kind of flip through it, it's a very minimalist deck. As you can see, the artwork is detailed and very beautiful, but the deck is dominated by a great amount of white space, which I really like here. It really helps the artwork kind of pop and just draw your attention to where it needs to be drawn. And it does have, again, this really wonderful sort of dreamlike, fluid energy because it's watercolor. And I don't know, the symbolism is kind of interesting to me because so much of it feels at times very reminiscent of Greco-Roman mythology in parts. A lot of different world mythologies, but especially Greco-Roman I've found. Some of these cards, is this deck just going to be upside down the whole time? Because if so, I'm turning you over. We're not reading reversals today. So it does have this really interesting kind of world mythology feel to it that I do find sort of wonderfully, again, hazy, dreamlike, and just really, really pretty. I'm kind of contemplating picking up some of Ciolo Thomas's other decks just because I don't know what it is. There's something about this deck that just really vibes with me. I just love having it in my hands. I love this deck. I think it's so pretty. There's our cover for the box, the Queen of Cups. See now, can you tell like I've recently used this deck and haven't like reordered it? Our Moon, the Hierophant. I love this Hierophant with the bear. So again, it's not... it's RWS system, but not at all a clone. It's doing some very interesting things on occasion with the symbolism here. It has a lot of again, it's a very fluid deck, a lot of water energy, but also a lot of animal energy in this deck, which I quite like. So this has become one of my one of my favorite decks. There's just something about it. Like, that's what I'm saying. Like you see what I mean? Where it's like some of the figures feel almost like marble statuary. So it has this very kind of wonderful kind of Greco-Roman feel to it in places. I find this card so interesting too. See what I'm saying? Greco-Roman. So anyway, this makes me really happy because, again, there's not a lot of Greco-Roman mythology decks that are out right now that I'm happy with the art. So this kind of, I don't know, scratches that itch for me to kind of have a deck that feels kind of Greco-Roman. However, again, this deck it's so dreamy, it's so surreal and strange. It has wonderful water energy, wonderful animal energy, and I really resonate with it a lot. I think it might be my soul deck. So that is the Linestrider. All right, so this deck is actually one of my few Oracle decks, which is the Oracle of Mystical Moments by Katrin Wells Stein. And I'm very excited because she has an accompanying tarot deck coming out, I believe next month, so November, and I cannot wait to get my hands on it because this is one of my favorite Oracle decks. It really kind of epitomizes what I'm saying when I say this kind of dreamlike, surreal quality. Like, that's the kind of theme that, again, defined this video, and I think that her work really kind of encapsulates that very, very well. These liminal dreamscapes. So I cannot wait to get my hands on a tarot deck to match this oracle, because it is still one of my absolute favorites. It does come with a little paperback book. It just has explanations for everything, as is so often especially needed with an oracle, just to understand the artist's justification and the author's justification for what is going on in this oracle. But I'm going to go ahead and jump right to her. So again, it does have this very sort of a fairy tale energy. There are references to fairy tales in this deck. However, it has that very kind of wonderful, surreal dreamscape quality that I really like in an oracle deck. I find I really like having these kind of surreal, I like my oracles to be surreal, because I like that you have to read them intuitively in that instance, and I quite like reading oracle decks intuitively. See, it's so beautiful and so strange. I'm very, very excited again about her tarot deck, and we'll use it all the time with this. I usually use this as my oracle with a lot of my dream decks. So again, like the Ostara and a number of others. And there's something kind of wonderfully, I don't really know how to define this style exactly. It's almost kind of neo-Edwardian, like neo, like 1910s, like this, for example, right? Has that very kind of 1910s, 1920s, steampunk journey to the moon kind of energy that I really like. There's our Harlequin mouse. So it does have this kind of, I don't know, old world feeling, but when I say old world, I don't mean old world like medieval. I mean more like old world in the sense of vintage. Let's put it that way. Vintage. Or like this, yeah, Victorian flower maiden. So it does have a really wonderful vintage feel to it. It has a wonderful dreamlike sensibility, a lot of animal energy, a lot of, again, human-animal hybrids, which I am always a fan of, and very, very open to intuitive reading, which I quite like. So if you're someone who really likes, I think, early 19th century surreal or impressionist art, I think you might dig this deck, definitely. You see, again, like, she's a human, but then her skirt turns into like the actual wing of a swan. So I like the hybridized energy in this deck very much. I've almost flipped through the whole thing. It's very pretty. How many cards are in here? 52. Okay, so about the size of a standard deck of playing cards. Yeah, our Victorian maiden. All right, so that is the Oracle of Mystical Moments by Katrin Wells Stein. Look out for the tarot deck of hers that is coming out next month, because her artwork is so beautiful. And I think really great for, again, intuitive reading and for the purposes of tarot and oracle. So cannot wait. I just can't wait to get my hands on that deck. So this next deck is one I don't know, I have mixed feelings about. It is one I've used quite a bit, and I think maybe what it is that this is a deck, this is the Ostara Tarot. This is a deck that has 4 different artists: Molly Applejohn, Eden Cook, Krista Gibbard, and Julia Iredale. And all 4 of them have really beautiful art styles. And I think that some of their art styles work more cohesively with others than others do. I don't know, there's a kind of sense of incoherency or a lack of unity in this deck that I don't know, kind of, it's not even bothers me, but I think it's kind of preventing me from bonding with it for some reason. So a couple practical points about this deck. It does come in such a pretty box, but kind of an impractical box. It's a box that does require you to split your deck in half, which is a little bit annoying, but not the end of the world. And does come with our lovely guidebook, which is full color and very well made. Again, it's a wonderfully well made deck for the price point. Certainly has lovely, very glossy cardstock, which isn't always my favorite, but I know some folk do like it. It's very sturdy cardstock. It does have gilt edging, which you might notice looking at mine that it looks a little worn and torn. And part of that is because when I first got my Ostara and opened it up, a lot of the cards were stuck together. And when I say stuck, I mean stuck because of the gilding. Even after putting the deck in the freezer for a couple of hours, I had such a difficult time getting some of these cards to peel apart, and I ended up kind of damaging the gilding on this deck. And I've heard from other folk that is something that they also struggled with, that when they got their deck, theirs also was very much stuck together. So it kind of damaged it right out of the gate. So it wasn't, I was kind of upset about that because it is such a beautiful deck. These backs are, I think, possibly my favorite card backs of any tarot deck I own. I think that these are so, so beautiful. And again, there are cards in this deck that I think are so stunning. But there are some hinky little things about this deck that for whatever reason kind of, I don't know, prevents me from bonding with it. I haven't really bonded with it fully. This is one of my favorite cards in the deck, which is our Fool. She's so witchy and lovely. Magician. High Priestess, our cover art. Oops, they're all just toppling. It hurt that I didn't like it. I do love this deck. Like, I do love the deck. Do you ever have a deck that's like, I love this deck, I think it's a beautiful art piece, but for some reason, like, I just don't enjoy actually reading with it? Like, that's this deck for me. Also, like the Hush Tarot, I'm all having the same situation with. Our Emperor, our Hierophant. So as I'm flipping through, you can kind of see that, again, the art styles from card to card are different, that there are 4 distinctive art styles here, which, you know, in and of itself, I don't mind. I do think that, again, there are some art styles in here that I do prefer more than others. Here's the card I was looking for. I won't say whose, just because I think that's, I don't know, rude or something, but there's definitely art styles in this deck that I do prefer over other art styles in the deck that make me kind of wish at times that it's like it was just a deck in that one art style, or even just those 2 art styles. And a couple other little odd things that I know that people have talked about in a lot of flip-throughs of this deck that, like this, for example, is the Page of Cups, but this just screams Page of Wands, like with, you know, the fiery color palette, the lantern, the foxes, but it's Page of Cups. And the only real way you would know that, because you can see it doesn't say Page of Cups, is like these itty bitty little cups in the tapestry of the curtain, which I don't know, this doesn't feel like Page of Cups to me. So I'm having that relationship with this deck where there's a couple cards where I just don't vibe. This is our Knight of Cups. Again, it doesn't say cup. We're just supposed to understand that this basin she's in is a cup. Our Queen of Cups. And then again, here's another one, our King of Cups, who also looks more like the King of Wands to me, or has King of Wands energy. So it's a deck where it's like, again, some of the art styles I do prefer over others, but there's also just a few cards where it's like, that just doesn't really resonate with me for the position that it was given. It is still such a lovely deck. And again, as you can see, this very kind of, again, dreamscape, strange energy, this kind of human, animal, liminal, surreal quality to all 4 of the styles, really. So I like this one with the raccoon stealing all the swords. I do like the deck. I don't bond with this deck. I don't know what it is. I need to I think I need to break it out more and work with it some more. Anyway, all right, so that is the Ostara. I won't belabor you with me musing over this deck and why she and I just don't get along. Like what it is about her that we just don't get along. We'll just scoot right along to the next one. All right, so this next deck has, I think, my other favorite backs of any of any deck in my collection. This is a Sasuraibito Tarot by Stasha Burrington, which is available through Etsy. I'll link the shop down below. Sasuraibito is a Japanese word that means wanderer. And so this deck has a very distinctively Japanese influence to it, to the art style, which I really, really like. Gorgeous deck. Again, the quality of this deck, it's gilded in gold. It has kind of that similar thick, glossy cardstock that the Ostara has. And it's funny, I almost didn't get this deck because I already had the Ostara. There was just something about their vibe that felt very similar to me, but I ended up picking this one up anyway, and I'm very glad that I did because I do prefer it to the Ostara. Comes in this beautiful two-piece box, which is gilded, gold, as you can see, this very fiery moth on the front. Love this box. And then our little nice, simple guidebook that just explains everything. And I just think that this is such a stunning deck. Such a stunning deck, such an interesting deck, and again, kind of surreal, strange. I love this High Priestess. Again, the cardstock isn't my favorite, not because of quality. I don't really love high gloss cardstock. I like this Emperor. I know a lot of people don't like this Emperor, but I do. I think that's kind of interesting. Or Hierophant. So this is, I don't know. Looking at it now, it's so funny that I thought to myself that it's like, oh, it's too similar to the Ostara. I have no idea why I initially thought that, because it really, really isn't at all. I'm looking for my favorite card in the deck. Our Justice. Hanged Man. There it is. This Death card is what really sold me on it, which I know this is the favorite card of a lot of people with this deck, but this Death card is just, there's something so beautiful and haunting. I just love the plants growing up out of her chest. It's just such a great Death card. So yeah, this deck, I don't have a lot to say about this deck just because I genuinely love it. I think it's genuinely stunning. It is a Tarot Tube favorite. You're very likely to see this one. I love this, the Astro Whale. I actually wrote my MA thesis about nautical science fiction and Moby Dick, so that card really appeals to me. But I find this deck really beautiful. If you're looking for a deck that has again, it's kind of surreal or has a distinctively Japanese sensibility about it, I highly recommend this deck. Both, again, the illustration style and the sensibility of how cards are placed, and some of the symbolism here is very much inflected by Japanese culture. And it's a deck that I find so, so lovely and very easy to work with. I like this. Again, I think this deck is easier to work with than the Ostara, and I don't know why that is. I prefer it, so I'm glad I have both. I love the Six of Cups. Anyway, so highly recommend the Sasuraibito Tarot. See, I just did the Tarot Tube thing where people call it Sasuraibito, excuse me, Tarot. Again, much higher price point than the Ostara, but I think it's totally worth it. It's just such a stunning deck. I would really like to pick up her matching Oracle deck too at some point, but I'm kind of trying to be good about buying pricier decks right now. So, but she does have a very beautiful Oracle deck also available in her Etsy shop that I recommend checking out, as well as beautiful prints and enamel pins and a number of other things. Her art style is so distinctive and so beautiful. That's actually where I also got this reading cloth that I'm using today. As you can see, again, the moth motif. So highly recommend checking out her Etsy shop. She has such beautiful work. All right, this next one is another Tarot Tube favorite, tarot favorite. It is a huge bestseller. This is Kim Kranz's The Wild Unknown Tarot, which comes nested. I don't think I have the original like paper sleeve that the first box came in, but it's nested in all of these boxes. It comes in a box inside of a box of a sleeve. What is in here? Oh, another box for a totally different deck. What is that doing in here? So right, may you always be on the inner quest. So really beautiful quality box, which I did hold on to the much larger box, even though I keep it in its smaller 2-piece, just because I find that a lot simpler. And again, they are illustrated inside and have these wonderful quotes from crayons. I love the back of this box too. So gorgeous boxes. And a really wonderful guidebook, if I can find what I just did with it. Here it is. Which, I don't know. I think this book is interesting. It's not in full color. Not that it full really matters. Again, the deck is, it has pops of color, but it's mostly a black and white deck anyway. It does have a full page illustration and then crayons' explanation for the card. This is an interesting deck. I have a strange relationship with this deck. It's like the Ostara again, where it's like, this is a tarot tube favorite that I try to work with, and I don't always get along with it for some reason. Here's our back, which is this wonderful kind of graphic, etchy pen and ink snake skin design. When I say I don't get along with this deck, what I mean is that I almost put this deck in my shadow decks, because this deck gives me such intensely dark readings. Why am I? See, she's upside down because she just wants to be stubborn. And I don't really know what to make of it. I always get such kind of just dark shadow readings out of this deck. I really do. I don't think I've ever gotten a positive reading out of this deck. And the thing is, I mean, the art style is really beautiful and interesting. I do like it. And it is an animal deck, as you can see, so it has wonderful animal energy, which I quite like. But anyway, the thing is, it is such a negative deck and a shadow deck. However, I feel like it's a very frank deck, that like all of the really dark readings I've gotten out of this deck are things I did need to hear, or things that, you know, did kind of come to pass. I know that some people do not enjoy how shadowy this deck can be, or how shadowy some of the cards are, like this Nine of Swords. People find very grotesque and unpleasant to look at. That doesn't bother me. Again, I like me a good dark deck, a good shadow deck, and that's nearly where I put this in the collection. But yeah, I never get positive readings with this deck. I don't know what it is. Because again, I feel of two minds about it, that I'm kind of troubled by that, but at the same time, it's like, well, maybe that's what you needed to hear. It gave me a lot of readings earlier this year about things that I definitely needed to do, or to kind of have at the back of my awareness that I was ignoring, and they did kind of come to pass. So it's like, well, maybe you should listen to this deck more. I don't know. Again, this isn't it's not my favorite deck. I do like the cardstock though. It has this very interesting texture, and it's sturdy without being so thick and glossy. Like, it's really easy to shuffle this deck. And I've heard, okay, two things. I've heard some tarot folk say that this is a good starter deck. Usually people who are trying to sell tarot decks. I don't agree that this is a good starter deck at all. Because this is one of the first mass market decks that I picked up when I first learning tarot. And I don't think this is a good starter deck at all. I really don't. Not if you're someone who's going to try to, learn, RWS and Marseille and Thoth. If you actually want to learn some of the traditional systems, I don't think starting off with a deck that feels quite this intuitive, or requires intuitive reading the way that I think this deck does, is your best kind of starter. It's a great deck for helping you learn how to read intuitively, I think. But I don't know if I would call it a great starter deck necessarily. I think this is a much more intermediate deck that left me feeling very confused initially, and I don't know. It's an interesting deck. I think this deck is a little overhyped. Only because, and I only say that because it's a beautiful deck. It's a brilliant, I like the guidebook. I do like the deck itself, but when I say overhyped, it's just because this is one of the most hyped decks ever. It's one of the best selling decks. It is such an overhyped deck. It's a deck that, again, is being marketed as like a great starter deck, when I just don't think it is a great starter deck. And I have heard some tarot tubers say that. That was my second point, that again, I've seen tarot folk say that this is a great starter deck, and I've seen a lot of tarot folk, especially recently, be like, no, it's really not. It's not a great starter deck. But as you can see, it is this very kind of dreamlike, strange, it has this very dreamlike, strange, surreal energy to it that I think is a very shadowy energy. I really do. And I think this is kind of a dark deck, which, you know, has its place, but it sure is a mean deck to me. I went in trying to love this deck, man. It gave me nothing but hard truths. So it's a deck that I do keep in my collection for that reason. It's like, well, it's kind of a mean deck, but sometimes you need that, I guess. So anyway, I'm going to quit ranting. So this is the Wild Unknown by Kim Krans. Okay, so the last two Dreamy decks that I want to show you guys is... They're both by the same artists, who are Nicholas Kahn and Richard Selznick, who have their own website that sells all of their decks, all of their other merch, their art. And that is the Carnival at the End of the World Tarot. And then I'm also going to show you guys really quick the Poker deck of the Drowning World, a panoramic parable told in 52 scenes, which is not technically a tarot deck or an oracle deck, but I'll show you, and you'll kind of get a sense that, like, it feels very much like a tarot deck. But first is the Carnival at the End of the World. So this is a deck that I quite wanted. My brother and his girlfriend got this for me for my my birthday, which just happened, and I was so glad. They were kind enough to get me the deck and get me the guidebook and this little guy, which just had me completely over the moon, because this is a deck I've wanted to pick up for a while. It's a beautiful indie deck, so a little bit on, you know, on the pricey side, as indie decks tend to be. I love these Harlequin backgrounds, and this is a deck that I also almost put in my dark shadow / horror deck collection, because there's something about this deck that is wonderfully it's wonderfully macabre, but macabre in the most kind of carnivalesque sense. It feels, again, very much like Something Wicked This Way Comes, or Batman, or like Lemony Snicket. Like, it has this very kind of dark energy, but it's a dark energy that's very much steeped in imagery of the carnival and the strange, and that's something that quite appeals to me for a number of very specific reasons that have to do with my academic interests and a number of other things. But this is such a gorgeous, strange deck. So it comes in this really pretty little tuck box, and again, I know I said I don't love tuck boxes, but I do like this one. It is a little hard to get the deck in and out. This box is a very tight fit. A tarot deck invented and realized by Messrs. Orlovsky and Falk of the troupe Fledermaus. So it has this very kind of wonderful sort of like Victorian feel to it, like an 18th or 19th century feel to this, like a 19th or 18th century carnival. And I find that really appealing. I was really happy that my brother and his girlfriend did go ahead and pick up Madame Lulu's Book of Fate, which is the accompanying guidebook to the Carnival at the End of the World, written by Sarah Faulkner. I'm so glad they got me this, because this is a very strange deck that doesn't particularly follow any of the major three tarot systems, you know, RWS, Thoth, and Marseille. So this is a time where it's like I kind of needed this guidebook, because I'm trying to follow along with some of the choices being made here, because it's a very strange deck. It has a lot of extra cards. It has, as you can see right here on the top, these extra cards that are just these kind of figures who exist within this fictional space of this carnival at the end of the world. We have Orlovsky and Madame Lulu, and they're these strange bat-like, you know, these vampire people, Dr. Falk, that I think you can kind of see looking at these why I almost put this in my dark / horror decks, because it does have that wonderful kind of macabre dark energy. It's such a pretty deck. Again, beautiful cardstock. I love these backs. It is such a pretty deck and such a dream-like strange deck. This is a intensely surreal deck that requires a lot of, I feel, intuitive reading, especially if you don't get the accompanying guidebook, which definitely does help. It's not super forthcoming, but it definitely helps kind of just connect the pieces and understand the narrative that is going on here. I feel like something that Kahn and Selznick do with their decks is that they create these stories to the degree that they have like these little like movie trailers for their decks, as though the deck like has a movie based on it. Like there's a story being told here, which I find very, very interesting and pleasing. And so this is kind of like having the screenplay just to kind of help you understand what the story is. I like that strength card. It's interesting. But as you can see, again, like this very strange, almost, not nightmare exactly, but sort of nightmarish sensibility that it's not like a nightmare. You ever just have those dreams where it's like that they're very strange and vaguely disturbing just because the imagery is so uncanny and doesn't make sense, but it's not necessarily a nightmare. I love that. It's interesting to me how often Egyptian mythology pops up in the justice card, which is like, it makes sense as this very kind of recognizable symbol for justice, but it is curious. I have many decks that have an Egyptian motif for the justice deck. If I'm not mistaken, the Ostara does as well. I think it's Amat as the justice card with her wings. Hanged Man. I love this death. He's so cool. So as you can see, like this art style, that it's very kind of strange. It's very dreamlike. It kind of reminds me of What Dreams May Come, that novel by Richard Matheson, and then the film with Robin Williams, but it's like a really dark. Not that movie isn't dark, but like that this has like a much more, has the kind of a similar fantasy sensibility, but like a really dark take on it. That I find quite pleasing. Sorry, slight technical difficulty there for just a second with the camera. But like I was saying, it does have this very kind of surreal fantasy quality that's kind of reminiscent of What Dreams May Come. It has a very kind of gothic sensibility, again, because it's this kind of bizarre vintage carnival, which, you know, the gothic literature loves a good carnival. But again, it's kind of like a soft gothic, right? Like more like a Lemony Snicket gothic. Which I really like. I like that aesthetic. And then again, it just has this this kind of hybridized energy. Again, that there are figures in this deck that are half human, half animal, half human, half machine, are humanoid but plants, like humanoid plant life, plant-like humans. And it's just like, I find that very pleasing. Again, it really contributes to like the kind of bizarre Batman quality of this deck too, since all the Batman rogues are so strange. This is one of the extra cards that's added onto the major arcana here. There's the Tempest, the Inferno, the Deluge, the Flood. So there are, like I said, a lot of extra cards in this deck. So having the guidebook does, I think, help. It is sold separately. You do have to buy the guidebook separately because, of course. But I would be kind of I would have been lost with this deck initially, I think without the guidebook, at least to kind of, or at least I feel like it adds to your experience of this deck if you have this guidebook and kind of can start to help you build a narrative and world build out the world that these characters live in. So a very, very interesting piece, I think, of art. As are, again, Selznick and Kranz. Sorry, Selznick. Not Kranz. I'm thinking of Kim Kranz. Sorry, Selznick and Kahn's other decks, which I'm going to go ahead and just show you their other deck really quick, which this deck is so fascinating. I haven't used it a ton. Again, my birthday was last month, so I just got both of these decks in hand. But this is the poker deck of the Drowning World, a panoramic parable told in 52 scenes. So it's this little itty bitty pocket deck about the size of, actually quite a small deck of cards. And these are our backs, this kind of marbled energy. And this is such a strange little poker deck, which it's kind of funny. I've actually seen folks who review poker decks, like playing card decks on YouTube, talk about this deck, and they have noticed that they're like, this feels like a tarot deck, which I think looking at it, you can definitely see that it feels kind of like a tarot deck, because it is, again, it's basically like a tarot deck without the major arcana, right? It's the 52 cards of a standard poker deck. So it's our minors, more or less, that they are broken up into these different suits. Sorry, I wanted to double check and make sure I had these suits exactly right. So there, again, it is broken up into 4 suits like a standard poker deck, but instead of, you know, hearts, spades, it's weeds, birds, chimneys, and icebergs. And I think that if you spend enough time playing with this deck and studying this deck, you'll be able to find equivalencies between obviously the 4 suits of tarot, of the minor arcana. It's another deck I almost put in my dark deck collection because, again, it's called the Poker Deck of the Drowning World, and it has this very kind of almost sinister energy because it's a deck that feels fundamentally about things like, you know, global warming and the futurity of the planet, and that this is a world that is, you know, literally drowning, dying. And so it's a quite dark little storytelling deck that I think is very interesting. It's very preoccupied with the tension between nature and industrialization. Has all these wonderful animals. Again, one of the suits is the suit of birds. But that, I don't know, there's something about this deck that I really respond to as a Floridian. I think there's these wetlands because, you know, living in a place is very, very vulnerable to global warming and the thought of, you know, the world drowning, literally drowning. More like the wasting away or passing away of, you know, these really remarkably fragile ecological systems. And that's something that this deck is rather interested in. I think this deck is so interesting. And then we have like chimneys. So again, this focus on industrialization. And you're meant to be able to, if I'm not mistaken, I haven't really had a chance to play with it a lot, but if you lay out these cards end to end, you're meant to be able to, like, it will build a panoramic story, if I'm not mistaken. So, and you can see some of the kind of panoramas on the sides of the box. So if you lay them all out, they will start to actually build you this kind of map, or again, help you follow along with this story that feels predominantly like, you know, the rise of industrialization and the destruction of this ecological system. And it's a really it's dark. I think this deck is really dark and the most kind of wonderful. I've seen a couple reviewers compare this deck to like Ari Aster's Midsummer, right, where it's like this is like a very horrifying, sinister deck that nevertheless has this very kind of summery, lovely energy. There's our icebergs melting. So it's a very interesting deck. I haven't used it a ton yet as an actual tarot. And this explains like a couple different games that you can play with this, which is very interesting. House of Cards, gentle folk, as you play this game, heed the tales these suits do frame. Behold the flock of birds who choke upon the chimney's fiery smoke, whose heath doth melt the icy flow, and cause unwanted weeds to grow. For remember, nasty fates befall a house of cards that's built too tall. So it's an interesting piece of art. I think that this is a deck that is telling a narrative. It's a very politically inflected narrative. It's an interesting piece that I look forward to kind of playing with more. And again, one that I think could easily belong in a shadow deck collection, because it's very much kind of calling things like futurity into question. This is such a downer video. I didn't mean for a dreamy deck video to end on such a dark note. Sorry. But these decks are really, really beautiful. I highly recommend Selznick and Kahn's decks. Just because I like the fact that for decks that don't follow one of the traditional systems, these are decks that are very interested in, again, building out an actual narrative or becoming a storytelling deck. And I just think that that's really clever. I think that these decks are very smart and, again, beautiful artwork. And so anyway, they easily could belong in my dark deck collection. But I think that the sort of dreamlike, strange quality of each of them won out. I feel like even the deck of the Drowning World, that there's something so kind of like nightmarish and surreal about this deck that feels more like I don't know, surrealist paintings of the 1920s and 30s. Like, there's something about this deck that I just find very kind of troubling. But again, it feels like a troubling dreamscape to me. So these are kind of darker dream decks. All right, so on that cheerful note, again, I'm gonna go ahead and wrap up this video. If you want to follow along on this journey and look through the decks, then I highly invite you to go ahead and like and subscribe. I'd be happy to have you as a subscriber. And again, the next installment, I think, is going to be classic decks. And when I say classic decks, I mean like good starter decks, RWS decks, RWS clones, your very kind of standard tarot deck, of which I have too many. So like my tarot decks that aren't really themed, really, again, so a lot of RWS and RWS clones, which I'm hoping there's enough variance in the artwork to be a rather interesting installment of what is definitely going to be a 5-part series of this series, which is going to carry me all the way through to the 31st, I imagine. So comment down below, let me know which of these decks was your favorite. Are you mad at me that I don't like the Ostara Tarot or the Wild Unknown? Do you agree that these decks are a little ooky spooky, or do you love them? Please let me know. I would love to talk to you guys about some of these decks. And till next time, I'm Jackie, and I'll see you later.